The sun was just beginning to rise over the calm waters of Pine Lake as Marcus Williams stepped out of his lakeside cabin. At 45 years old, Marcus had worked harder than most people could imagine to get where he was today. He grew up in a small apartment with his single mother, who worked 2 jobs just to pay the rent. As a young boy, Marcus promised himself that one day he would own something beautiful and peaceful where he could find quiet moments away from the busy world. Marcus walked slowly toward the wooden dock, carrying his favorite fishing rod and a thermos of hot coffee. The morning air was cool and fresh, and he could hear birds singing in the tall trees around the lake. This was his favorite time of day. No phone calls from work, no meetings to attend, no problems to solve. Just him, the water, and the fish that lived below the surface. 3 years ago, Marcus had made the biggest purchase of his entire life. After building his construction company from nothing into a successful business, he finally had enough money to buy his dream property. Pine Lake was a private 50-acre lake surrounded by beautiful trees and rolling hills. The moment he saw it, Marcus knew he had to have it. The price was high, but he had saved every penny for years to make this dream come true. Marcus untied his small fishing boat from the dock and climbed inside. The boat was nothing fancy, just a simple aluminum boat with a small motor, but it was perfect for his needs. He had never been the type of person who needed expensive things to show off. All he wanted was a peaceful place where he could think and relax. As he started the motor and headed toward the center of the lake, Marcus looked around at the expensive homes that sat on the hills surrounding his property. The neighborhood was called Willowbrook Heights, and the houses were worth millions of dollars each. The people who lived there drove fancy cars and wore expensive clothes. Marcus had seen them using his lake for fishing and swimming over the years, but he had never minded sharing the beauty of the water with his neighbors. Marcus was a quiet man who believed in treating people with kindness and respect. Even though he now owned something valuable, he had not forgotten where he came from. He remembered what it felt like to have nothing, and he never wanted to make other people feel unwelcome or unwanted. When he bought the lake, he could have put up signs telling people to stay away, but that was not his style. The fishing club from Willowbrook Heights had been using the lake for many years, even before Marcus bought it. The previous owner had given them permission to fish there, and Marcus saw no reason to change that arrangement. He figured that as long as everyone was respectful and took care of the property, there was plenty of room for everyone to enjoy the peaceful water. Marcus found his favorite fishing spot near a group of fallen trees on the north side of the lake. This was where the fish liked to hide during the day, and he had caught some of his biggest bass in this exact location. He turned off the motor and let the boat drift quietly in the gentle current. He opened his thermos and poured himself a cup of coffee, breathing in the steam as it rose from the hot liquid. The coffee tasted perfect in the cool morning air. Marcus cast his fishing line into the water and settled back in his seat to wait. This was what happiness felt like to him. Not the stress of running a business or the pressure of making money, but simple moments of peace and quiet. Marcus thought about how far he had come in life. From a poor kid in a small apartment to a successful business owner with his own private lake. The journey had not been easy, but every struggle had been worth it to reach this moment. He closed his eyes and listened to the gentle sound of water lapping against his boat. Little did Marcus know that this perfect morning was about to be interrupted by a situation that would change everything. In just a few minutes, his peaceful Saturday would turn into a confrontation that would test everything he believed about treating people with respect and kindness. Marcus was enjoying the peaceful silence when suddenly a loud voice broke through the morning calm like a knife cutting through butter. The voice was sharp and demanding, coming from the direction of the main dock near the Willowbrook Heights neighborhood. Marcus opened his eyes and looked toward the shore, wondering what could be causing such a disturbance on his quiet lake. Standing at the edge of the wooden dock was a woman who looked to be in her early 50s. She had perfectly styled blonde hair that looked like she had just left an expensive salon. Her workout clothes were bright pink and clearly cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. Everything about her appearance screamed wealth and privilege, from her designer sunglasses to her spotless white tennis shoes. The woman was waving her arms in the air, like she was trying to flag down a rescue helicopter. Her voice carried easily across the still water as she shouted in Marcus's direction. Even from a distance, Marcus could see that she was angry about something, though he had no idea what he could have done wrong. "Hey, you in the boat?" the woman called out, her voice getting louder with each word. "Yes, you with the fishing rod. I need you to move your boat right now. You are not supposed to be here." Marcus looked around the lake, confused by the woman's demand. He had been fishing in this same spot for 3 years without any problems. The lake was completely empty except for his small boat, and he was not bothering anyone or doing anything wrong. He could not understand why this stranger was yelling at him. Behind the blonde woman, Marcus could see other people starting to gather on the shore. They were setting up folding chairs and unpacking fishing equipment from expensive-looking bags and coolers. Some of them were wearing matching shirts that said Willowbrook Heights Fishing Club in fancy letters. Marcus suddenly remembered that this was the 3rd Saturday of the month, which meant the neighborhood fishing club was having their monthly tournament. The woman continued shouting across the water, her voice becoming more demanding with each sentence. "This is a private lake, and today is our fishing tournament. You need to pack up your things and leave immediately. We have exclusive rights to fish here during our events." Marcus had never spoken to any of the fishing club members before, even though he had seen them using his lake many times over the past 3 years. He was not the type of person who liked to introduce himself to strangers or make a big deal about owning the property. He preferred to keep to himself and let people enjoy the beauty of the lake in peace. But now this woman was making demands and acting like she owned the place. Marcus could feel this calm morning slipping away as the situation became more tense and uncomfortable. He had dealt with difficult people throughout his business career, but he always tried to handle conflicts with patience and respect. Marcus started his small motor and slowly moved his boat closer to the dock so he could speak to the woman without shouting. As he got nearer, he could see that she was even more angry than he had first thought. Her face was red with frustration, and she was tapping her foot impatiently like a child who was not getting her way. The other fishing club members had stopped setting up their equipment and were now watching the confrontation with great interest. Some of them were nodding in agreement with the blonde woman, while others looked uncomfortable with her aggressive behavior. Marcus could hear them whispering among themselves about the situation. When Marcus was close enough to have a normal conversation, he turned off his motor and spoke in his usual calm and polite voice. "Good morning, ma'am. I am sorry if I am disturbing your fishing tournament. I was not aware that you had an event planned for today." The blonde woman put her hands on her hips and looked down at Marcus like he was a child who had broken an important rule. Her name was Sandra Peterson, though Marcus did not know this yet. Sandra was the president of both the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association and the fishing club. She was used to getting her way in everything, and people in the neighborhood had learned not to argue with her when she made decisions. Sandra had lived in Willowbrook Heights for 12 years, and during that time she had made it her personal mission to keep the community perfect. She organized neighborhood watch groups, planned social events, and made sure that everyone followed the rules exactly as they were written. Some people thought she was helpful, but others whispered that she was too controlling and liked power too much. "Listen here," Sandra said in a voice that was loud enough for everyone on the shore to hear. "I don't know how you got access to this lake, but you clearly don't understand the rules around here. This is private property that belongs to our community, and we have specific times when different activities are allowed." Marcus remained calm, just as he always did when people became upset or angry. His mother had taught him that losing your temper never solved problems. It only made them worse. He had built his successful construction business by treating everyone with respect, even when they were difficult to work with. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion here," Marcus said politely. "I have every right to be on this lake, and I am not trying to cause any problems for your fishing tournament. Maybe we can work something out so everyone can enjoy the water." But Sandra was not interested in working anything out. She had already decided that Marcus was a troublemaker who was trying to ruin her perfectly planned event. In her mind, there was only one solution to this problem, and that was for Marcus to leave immediately. "There is no confusion here at all," Sandra replied, her voice getting sharper with each word. "Our fishing club has been using this lake for over 10 years. We have established rights here, and we don't appreciate outsiders who think they can just show up and do whatever they want." The other fishing club members were gathering closer to Sandra, and Marcus could see that they were starting to take sides in the conflict. Some of them looked uncomfortable with Sandra's aggressive behavior, but none of them were brave enough to speak up against her. Sandra had a reputation for making life difficult for people who disagreed with her. Sandra pulled out her expensive smartphone and began taking pictures of Marcus and his boat. The camera made clicking sounds as she captured images from different angles, like she was collecting evidence for a court case. "I am documenting this violation for our homeowners association records," Sandra announced loudly. "We have strict rules about unauthorized use of community property, and those rules apply to everyone without exception." Marcus tried once more to explain the situation. "Ma'am, I really think you should listen to what I am trying to tell you. There has been a serious misunderstanding about who has the right to use this lake." But Sandra had stopped listening. She was too focused on being right and showing everyone that she was in charge. "I don't want to hear any excuses or sob stories," she said firmly. "Rules are rules, and they exist for a reason. If we let one person break the rules, then everyone will think they can do whatever they want." The fishing club members began nodding and murmuring their agreement with Sandra. They had spent money on this tournament and had been looking forward to it for weeks. They did not want some stranger ruining their special day. More fishing club members had finished setting up their equipment and were now walking over to see what all the shouting was about. They formed a small crowd around Sandra, and Marcus could see that the situation was getting worse instead of better. The peaceful morning he had been enjoying was turning into a public confrontation that he had never wanted. Among the crowd was Robert Chen, a retired banker who had moved to Willowbrook Heights 5 years ago. There was also Margaret Thompson, a real estate agent who sold expensive homes in the area. Both of them were loyal supporters of Sandra and trusted her judgment completely. They had never questioned her decisions before, and they were not going to start now. "Sandra is absolutely right," Robert said in a loud voice that everyone could hear. "We pay high homeowners association fees to maintain access to this lake. We should not have to deal with people who do not belong here." Margaret nodded her head in strong agreement. "This is exactly the kind of problem we moved to Willowbrook Heights to avoid. If we allow this behavior, pretty soon everyone will think they can use our private facilities whenever they want." Sandra felt encouraged by the support from her fishing club members. She was confident that she was handling the situation correctly, and she believed that Marcus would give up and leave once he realized how many people were against him. "You see," Sandra said to Marcus while pointing at the crowd behind her, "everyone here agrees that you need to leave immediately. This is not just my opinion. This is the opinion of our entire community." Marcus looked at the faces of the people on the shore and could see that they had already made up their minds about him. They did not know anything about him or his situation, but they had decided to support Sandra without asking any questions. Marcus felt sad that people could be so quick to judge someone they had never met. The crowd began to get more vocal in their demands for Marcus to leave. Someone shouted that he was being selfish and inconsiderate. Another person said that he obviously did not understand how things worked in their neighborhood. The voices got louder and more aggressive as the group feeding off each other's anger. Sandra raised her hand to quiet the crowd, enjoying the feeling of being in control of the situation. "I am going to give you one last chance to do the right thing," she said to Marcus. "Pack up your fishing gear and leave our lake immediately, or we will be forced to take official action against you." Marcus sat quietly in his boat, listening to the demands and threats from the people on the shore. He had been in difficult situations before in his business career, and he knew that sometimes the best strategy was to remain calm and let other people show their true character. "What kind of official action are you talking about?" Marcus asked in a steady voice. Sandra smiled like she had been waiting for him to ask that exact question. "First, I will call the police and report you for trespassing on private property. Then I will contact our private security company and have you escorted off the premises. Finally, I will file a formal complaint with the county about unauthorized use of our community facilities." The fishing club members cheered and clapped at Sandra's threats, impressed by how thoroughly she had thought through the consequences for Marcus. They believed that no reasonable person would want to deal with police officers and security guards just to go fishing. But Marcus did not look worried or scared by Sandra's threats. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his own cell phone. The crowd watched curiously as he scrolled through his contacts and selected a number. "That's a good idea about making phone calls," Marcus said calmly. "I think I should make one too." Sandra walked away from the crowd and pulled out her phone, confident that a few official phone calls would solve this problem quickly. She had used this strategy many times before when dealing with people who did not follow the rules in Willowbrook Heights. Most people became cooperative very quickly when they realized they might have to deal with police officers or security guards. The first call Sandra made was to the local police department. She used her most official-sounding voice when she spoke to the dispatcher, explaining that there was a trespassing situation at the community lake that needed immediate attention. "This is Sandra Peterson, president of the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association," she said into the phone. "We have an unauthorized person using our private lake during a scheduled community event. He has been asked to leave multiple times but refuses to cooperate." The dispatcher took down Sandra's information and promised to send an officer to investigate the situation. Sandra felt satisfied with the professional way she had handled the call. She was sure that once a police officer arrived, Marcus would realize how serious the situation had become. Next, Sandra called Prestige Security Services, the private company that sometimes patrolled the expensive neighborhoods in the area. She explained the situation to them and requested that they send a security guard to help remove the trespasser from the lake. "We need someone here as soon as possible," Sandra told the security company. "This person is disrupting our fishing tournament and refusing to follow community rules. We may need assistance escorting him off the property." The security company agreed to send someone within the hour, which made Sandra feel even more confident about her approach to the problem. She believed that Marcus would certainly leave when he saw both police officers and security guards arriving at the lake. Sandra's final call was to James Morrison, the vice president of the Homeowners Association Board. James was a retired lawyer who had always supported Sandra's strict enforcement of community rules. She knew he would be outraged to hear about someone using the lake without permission. "James, we have a serious situation at the lake," Sandra said when he answered the phone. "Someone is trespassing during our fishing tournament and refusing to leave when asked. I've already called the police and security, but I wanted to make sure you knew what was happening." James promised to drive over to the lake immediately to see the situation for himself. Sandra felt proud of how quickly and efficiently she had handled the crisis. She was sure that by the time all the authorities arrived, Marcus would understand that he had made a serious mistake. Meanwhile, Marcus sat quietly in his boat and made his own phone call. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for James Mitchell, his personal lawyer and close friend. James had been Marcus's attorney for over 15 years and had handled the legal work when Marcus bought the lake property. "Jim, it's Marcus," he said when the lawyer answered. "I'm at the lake, and there's a situation developing with some of the neighbors. I think it's time to clarify the ownership issue once and for all." James Mitchell knew immediately what Marcus was talking about. When Marcus had bought the lake 3 years ago, James had suggested that they inform the neighbors about the change in ownership, but Marcus had wanted to avoid any conflict or hard feelings. "Do you want me to come down there with the property documents?" James asked. "Yes, I think that would be best," Marcus replied. "These people seem to believe they have some kind of legal right to use the lake, and they're not interested in listening to reasonable explanations. James promised to gather all the necessary paperwork and drive to the lake right away. Marcus felt relieved that he would soon have professional help dealing with the increasingly hostile crowd on the shore. Sandra returned to the group of fishing club members, feeling confident and in control of the situation. "I've made all the necessary calls," she announced. "The police are on their way, security is coming, and our homeowners association board is sending someone to document this violation." The crowd cheered Sandra's thoroughness, impressed by how quickly she had taken action to protect their community rights. 20 minutes later, a white police car with blue and red stripes pulled into the parking area near the lake. Officer David Rodriguez stepped out of the vehicle and looked around at the scene in front of him. He had been a police officer for 8 years and had responded to many calls in wealthy neighborhoods, but this was his first time dealing with a lake dispute. Officer Rodriguez was known for being fair and professional in his work. He always listened to both sides of a story before making any decisions, and he tried to help people solve their problems peacefully whenever possible. He could see that there was tension between the group of people on the shore and the man in the small boat. Sandra immediately walked over to greet the officer, her high-heeled shoes clicking on the wooden dock as she approached. She had put on her most serious expression and was carrying a folder full of homeowners association documents that she thought would be helpful. "Officer Rodriguez, thank you so much for coming so quickly," Sandra said in her most official voice. "I am Sandra Peterson, president of the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. We have a very serious trespassing situation that needs your immediate attention." Sandra pointed dramatically toward Marcus in his boat and began explaining her version of what had happened. She spoke quickly and used lots of important-sounding words, trying to convince the officer that Marcus was clearly breaking the law. "This man has been using our private lake without permission," Sandra continued. "When we asked him politely to leave, he became argumentative and refused to cooperate. Our fishing club has exclusive rights to use this lake during our scheduled tournaments." Officer Rodriguez listened politely to Sandra's complaint, taking notes in his small notebook. He had learned over the years that people in expensive neighborhoods sometimes exaggerated problems to get more attention from the police. He would need to hear the other side of the story before he could understand what was really happening. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns," Officer Rodriguez said calmly. "Now I need to speak with the gentleman in the boat to get his version of events." The officer walked to the edge of the dock and called out to Marcus. "Sir, I'm Officer Rodriguez with the local police department. I need you to bring your boat over here so we can discuss this situation." Marcus started his small motor and slowly moved his boat closer to the dock. He had dealt with police officers before in his construction business and knew the importance of being respectful and cooperative. As he approached the shore, he could see Sandra and the fishing club members watching his every move. When Marcus was close enough to talk without shouting, Officer Rodriguez asked to see his identification and boat registration. Marcus handed over his driver's license and the boat documents, which were all in perfect order. "Sir, can you tell me why you're here at this lake today?" Officer Rodriguez asked in a professional but friendly tone. Marcus looked directly at the officer and spoke in his usual calm voice. "Officer, I'm here because I own this lake and all the surrounding property. I have all the legal documents to prove it, and my lawyer is on his way here with the complete paperwork." The officer looked surprised by Marcus's answer. This was definitely not what he had expected to hear based on Sandra's complaint. He looked back at Sandra, who was standing behind him with her mouth open in shock. "That's impossible," Sandra said loudly, pushing forward to interrupt the conversation. "This lake has been part of our community for over a decade. Our fishing club has been using it with full permission for years. He's obviously lying to avoid getting in trouble." Officer Rodriguez held up his hand to quiet Sandra. "Ma'am, please let me handle this investigation." "Sir," he turned back to Marcus, "these are some serious claims you're making. Do you have any proof of ownership with you right now?" Marcus reached into his boat and pulled out a waterproof folder that contained some basic property documents. "Officer, I have some paperwork here, but my lawyer is bringing the complete file with all the official records. He should be here within the next few minutes." Sandra was becoming more agitated as she realized that Marcus seemed very confident about his claims. "Officer, you can't possibly believe this story. Why would someone who owns a lake just sit quietly while we used it for 3 years without saying anything?" Marcus answered before the officer could speak. "Because I believe in being a good neighbor, and I saw no harm in people enjoying the beauty of the water. But I never gave anyone exclusive rights or permission to treat me like a criminal on my own property." A black luxury car pulled into the parking area just as the tension was reaching its highest point. James Mitchell stepped out of his Mercedes wearing a crisp business suit and carrying a large leather briefcase. At 62 years old, James had the confident walk of someone who had spent decades handling legal disputes and difficult situations. James had been Marcus's friend and lawyer since Marcus first started his construction company 15 years ago. He had watched Marcus grow from a young man with big dreams into a successful businessman who never forgot his humble beginnings. James was proud of everything Marcus had accomplished and was happy to help him with this uncomfortable situation. "Good morning, Officer Rodriguez," James said as he approached the group. "I'm James Mitchell, attorney for Mr. Williams. I understand there's some confusion about property ownership that needs to be cleared up." James set his briefcase down on a nearby picnic table and began removing thick folders full of legal documents. The papers were organized in clear plastic sleeves and marked with colorful tabs that made everything easy to find. Sandra and the fishing club members gathered around the table, trying to see what the documents contained. "Officer, I have here the complete property records for this lake and all surrounding land," James said as he spread the papers across the table. "These include the original property deed, the title insurance policy, the professional land survey, and all county recording documents." Officer Rodriguez examined the first document, which was the official property deed showing that Marcus Williams had purchased the lake and 40 acres of surrounding land 3 years ago. The deed was signed, notarized, and recorded with the county clerk's office, making it a completely legal and binding document. Sandra pushed forward to look at the papers, her face growing pale as she began to understand what she was seeing. The documents were clearly official and professional, with government seals and official signatures that could not be faked or disputed. "This can't be right," Sandra said in a shaky voice. "We've been using this lake for over 10 years. The previous owner gave our fishing club permission to fish here whenever we wanted. We even helped pay for some of the maintenance and improvements." James Mitchell looked up from organizing his papers and spoke in a patient but firm voice. "Ma'am, whatever arrangements you had with the previous owner ended when Mr. Williams purchased the property. The new owner has every right to decide how his property is used and who has access to it." Officer Rodriguez continued examining the documents, including the professional land survey that showed exactly where Marcus's property began and ended. The survey clearly indicated that the entire lake and a significant amount of shoreline belonged to Marcus, with the Willowbrook Heights neighborhood beginning several hundred feet away from the water's edge. "Mr. Williams, these documents appear to be completely legitimate and in order," Officer Rodriguez said. "As the legal owner of this property, you have every right to be here, and you have the authority to decide who else can use your land." The fishing club members behind Sandra began whispering among themselves as they realized the serious mistake they had made. They had been using someone else's private property for years without the owner's permission, and now they had been rude and hostile to that same owner. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice still calm but now carrying the authority of someone who knew he was completely in the right. "Officer Rodriguez, I want everyone here to understand that I have been aware of the fishing club's activities for the past 3 years. I never said anything because I believe in being a good neighbor and sharing the beauty of nature." He looked directly at Sandra as he continued speaking. "However, the behavior I have experienced today is completely unacceptable. I have been accused of trespassing on my own property, threatened with police action, and treated with disrespect and hostility. James Mitchell added his professional opinion to support his client. "Officer, Mr. Williams has been extremely generous in allowing unofficial access to his private property. However, he has every legal right to control who uses his land, and when they use it." Sandra's confidence had completely disappeared as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Not only had she been wrong about who owned the lake, but she had also been incredibly rude to the actual property owner in front of dozens of witnesses. "Now wait just a minute," Sandra said desperately. "Surely we can work out some kind of arrangement here. Our fishing club has been a part of this community for many years, and we've always taken good care of the lake." But Marcus had heard enough of Sandra's demands and excuses for one day. The mood around the lake had completely changed as the reality of the situation became clear to everyone present. Sandra Peterson, who had been so confident and demanding just minutes earlier, now looked embarrassed and desperate. The fishing club members who had supported her were backing away, realizing they had been part of a serious mistake. Marcus stood up in his boat and addressed the entire group in a voice that was calm but firm. For the first time that morning, he was speaking with the full authority of someone who owned the property and had every right to make decisions about how it was used. "I want everyone here to understand exactly what has happened today," Marcus began. "For 3 years, I have allowed your fishing club to use my private lake without asking for permission, payment, or any kind of formal agreement. I did this because I believe in being a good neighbor and because I thought you were respectful people." Sandra tried to interrupt, but Marcus continued speaking without acknowledging her. "However, today I have been treated like a criminal on my own property. I have been accused of trespassing, threatened with police action, and spoken to with complete disrespect." Officer Rodriguez was taking notes of everything Marcus said, realizing that this situation was much more complicated than Sandra had originally described. The fishing club members were looking at each other with worried expressions, understanding that they had been using someone else's property without permission for years. Robert Chen, the retired banker who had earlier supported Sandra, stepped forward with an apologetic expression. "Mr. Williams, I want to apologize for my behavior earlier. We had no idea that you owned this property, and we certainly didn't mean to be disrespectful." Margaret Thompson, the real estate agent, also moved closer to the group. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding. If we had known you were the owner, we would have introduced ourselves years ago and asked for proper permission to use the lake." But Marcus was not interested in hearing apologies from people who had been quick to judge him and support Sandra's aggressive behavior. "The problem is not that you didn't know I owned the lake," he said. "The problem is how you treated a complete stranger who was doing nothing wrong." James Mitchell began gathering up the legal documents and putting them back in his briefcase. "Mr. Williams has been more than generous in allowing unofficial use of his property. However, he has every right to change that arrangement at any time, for any reason." Sandra realized that her position was becoming more desperate with each passing minute. The police officer was clearly on Marcus's side. The legal documents proved that Marcus owned the lake, and even her own fishing club members were starting to distance themselves from her aggressive behavior. "Mr. Williams, please let me explain," Sandra said in a much quieter voice than she had been using all morning. "I was just trying to protect our fishing tournament. We had no idea about the ownership situation, and I was only doing what I thought was best for our community." Marcus looked at Sandra with an expression that showed both disappointment and determination. "Sandra, you had many opportunities this morning to speak with me respectfully and ask questions about the situation. Instead, you chose to make demands, take pictures without permission, and call the police on someone who was fishing quietly on his own property." The fishing club members were now packing up their equipment and loading it into their cars. They could see that the tournament was over and that their club's future use of the lake was in serious jeopardy. Some of them were openly frustrated with Sandra for creating this mess with her aggressive approach. Officer Rodriguez finished writing his report and prepared to leave. "Mr. Williams, since you are the legal property owner, you have every right to ask these people to leave your land. There is no crime being committed here, and this appears to be a civil property matter." Marcus nodded his thanks to the officer, then turned his attention back to Sandra and the remaining fishing club members. It was time to make a decision that would affect all of them for years to come. Marcus Williams stood up in his boat and looked at every person gathered on the shore of his lake. The morning sun was now higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the water that had once been so peaceful and quiet. Everything had changed in just a few short hours, and there was no going back to the way things used to be. "I have made a decision about the future use of this lake," Marcus announced in a clear voice that everyone could hear. "Effective immediately, the Willowbrook Heights Fishing Club no longer has permission to use this property. You have until sunset today to remove all of your equipment and belongings from my land." The fishing club members looked shocked by Marcus's announcement. Even though they had realized their mistake, they had hoped that Marcus would be forgiving and allow them to continue using the lake. Sandra's face turned white as she understood that her aggressive behavior had cost the entire club their favorite fishing spot. "Mr. Williams, please reconsider this decision," Sandra said desperately. "Our fishing club has over 30 members who have been looking forward to using this lake for their recreation and relaxation. Surely we can work out some kind of agreement that would benefit everyone." But Marcus had already made up his mind. "Sandra, you had the chance to work something out when this situation first began. Instead of asking questions or trying to understand what was happening, you chose to be rude, make false accusations, and try to have me arrested on my own property." James Mitchell stepped forward to support his client's decision. "Mr. Williams has been extremely patient and generous for 3 years. However, no property owner should have to tolerate being treated like a criminal when they are doing nothing wrong." Robert Chen made one final attempt to save the situation for the fishing club. "Mr. Williams, most of us had nothing to do with the way you were treated this morning. We were just following Sandra's lead because we trusted her judgment. Please don't punish the entire club for one person's mistakes." Marcus looked at Robert with a serious expression. "Robert, I watched every person here support Sandra's demands without asking any questions. Not one of you spoke up to suggest that maybe there was another side to this story. You were all quick to judge a stranger and demand that he leave what you thought was your property." Margaret Thompson tried a different approach. "What if we offered to pay you a monthly fee for using the lake? We could sign a formal agreement that would protect everyone's rights and prevent this kind of misunderstanding from happening again." "The time for formal agreements was 3 years ago, when I first bought this property," Marcus replied. "I chose to be generous and allow informal use of the lake because I thought you were good people who would treat me with respect. Today proved that I was wrong about that." Sandra made one last desperate plea. "Mr. Williams, I am willing to apologize publicly for my behavior this morning. I will also resign from my position as president of the Homeowners Association if that would help convince you to let our club continue using the lake." Marcus shook his head. "Sandra, this is not about your apology or your job. This is about the fact that actions have consequences. You treated me badly when you thought I had no power to defend myself. Now you want to be friendly because you discovered that I own something you want to use." Officer Rodriguez had been listening to the entire conversation and could see that Marcus was not going to change his mind. "Mr. Williams has made his decision as the property owner, and he has every legal right to control access to his land. This is the end of the matter from a law enforcement perspective." Marcus started his boat engine and prepared to return to his private dock. "In the future, all of you might want to remember this lesson about treating people with respect. You never know who you are talking to or what they might be capable of when you push them too far." As Marcus drove his boat away from the group, Sandra and the fishing club members began the sad task of packing up their equipment and loading it into their cars. The Willowbrook Heights Fishing Club would never return to the beautiful lake, and Sandra Peterson had learned an expensive lesson about the importance of treating everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of who you think they are.